host, Grayson Gruenhafer, and today we got a fascinating storyline that has emerged out of Oxford, Mississippi, and that is Spencer Sanders is coming to town. He's going to Ole Miss. Found that out over the weekend. Another big pickup for Lane Kiffin there and the Rebels there at Ole Miss. I think, this is one of those things where you're seeing them add talent, right? You're adding to this competition, this kind of quarterback competition that has just kind of been added to and started to take place overnight, it really seems, because you had Jackson Dart on the roster. He's the incumbent, the guy who started this year, had an up and down year. Really, it was more of just an up and then a down for Jackson Dart over the course of this past season. So they went out, added Walker Howard, the LSU transfer, who has 4 years of eligibility left. They lost Luke Altmaier to Illinois, so you're already seeing the shuffling there. And now you got Spencer Sanders added to the room. Walker Howard, like I said, 4 years of eligibility left. Jackson Dart, 2 years left. And then Spencer Sanders, who is going into his final year of eligibility. So that kind of gives you a take of kind of what the room looks like. I'll get to that in a little bit. But first, let's talk about Spencer Sanders. So I read something that I found fascinating this week when I was kind of doing some prep work for Spencer Sanders. Now, I watched him play a lot of football, but I kind of wanted to get a sense for kind of what insiders were thinking, sources within the Oklahoma State program, just kind of all those things, right? And so I basically read that Spencer Sanders is leaving because he lost the job, okay? That's just not true. That's just simply not true. People kind of equating this to situations where a guy goes into his final year of eligibility and then loses his job to a younger guy. That's not what's happening at Oklahoma State. So I think there's two statements that can be true based on everything I've kind of read and heard. So I think Spencer Sanders was a guy who Oklahoma State wanted to come back. They were anticipating he would come back this final year. Sat out bowl prep, sat out the bowl game, entered the transfer portal. I think from that moment on, Oklahoma State kind of had to figure out, okay, we need to go to plan B. We need to figure out what we're going to do as a team going forward. How do we replace Spencer Sanders? So the other statement that I believe could be true is that if and when Spencer Sanders wanted to potentially come back, I think Oklahoma State was kind of done with that entire situation. So I think both statements can be true, that Oklahoma State would have liked to have had him back. I also think it's very factual that they could have told him no if he did kind of want that to be an option at the end of his transfer portal recruitment. Both statements can be true, but there's, without a doubt, if you watch them play this year, they wanted Spencer Sanders to come back. When you see who they replaced Spencer Sanders with, which was Michigan's third-string quarterback, Alan Bowman, who hasn't played a significant snap in the last 2 years, it's very clear that if he had come back, he would have been the most talented quarterback on that roster. Now, Alan Bowman may be fine, but Sanders is a guy that knows the offense, been there for a long time. So again, just get that thought out. He's a very solid quarterback, would have been the starting quarterback at Oklahoma State had he come back. So let's talk about him a little bit. This past year, just derailed by injuries. And it's really unfortunate because his 2021 season was really solid. It was his best year as a college quarterback. They made it to the Big 12 championship game, lost to Baylor. Had they won that game, they would have been in the college football playoff most likely. I think they would have gotten in over Cincinnati. They didn't. They go to the Fiesta Bowl. They play Notre Dame. They win that game. Spencer Sanders goes for 371 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, along with 125 yards on the ground to cap off what was a sensational 2021 season for Oklahoma State. Fast forward to this year. Great start to the season. I mean, a great start. Oklahoma State's first 7 games, they were 6-1, averaging 44.7 points per game. They looked great. Their only loss was to TCU in a game that, truthfully, if you go back and watch it, was just a complete, coin toss. I mean, it could have gone either way. It went to overtime. Great game. So, again, Oklahoma State is sitting there 6-1 and really looking like a team that could go back to the Big 12 championship and potentially win the Big 12. And then things shifted. They go into the Kansas State game. Spencer Sanders suffers a shoulder separation is what I believe it was. And so they get blown out in Manhattan. And from that point on, they go 1-5. They average 14.2 points per game. Guys, that is a 30-point difference with him on the field versus off the field. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. They were 1-5, like I said, after the injury. So I think it's pretty safe to say when he was on the field, Oklahoma State was far better. If he had been healthy all year, Oklahoma State would have been pretty formidable all season long. Didn't quite happen that way. For a career, completion percentage, 61%. Has 85 total touchdowns. That's including passing and rushing touchdowns. And then 40 interceptions. That's not great. That's the big kind of red flag when you talk about Spencer Sanders. The 40 interceptions, he's going to throw some. He's going to take chances. He's going to turn the ball over. But he also has the ability to make a lot of plays. And in the biggest games, he's shown at times that he can have some really big moments. Now, not every time, but in some of them, he's played exceptionally well. So looking at kind of the roster here, Jackson Dart last year, 62.5% of his passes he completed for 2,974 yards, 20 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and then 614 yards on the ground with 1 touchdown. To me, the thing that stands out the most here is that 1 touchdown on the ground. I mean, 614 yards, and he only scored once. I think that just goes to show you an area where they could improve with Spencer Sanders. Sanders has 18 touchdowns on the ground. Dart, again, 11 interceptions. That's pretty on par with what Spencer Sanders is probably going to do. So you're kind of hoping that, okay, 21 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. I think you're hoping with Spencer Sanders that it can maybe, tick up a little bit. Maybe it's more something like 30 touchdowns to only 11 interceptions. Something along those lines can be a huge difference. So I think it's important to also talk about kind of where Ole Miss was at this year. So they were 7-0 to start the year. Now, at the beginning of their schedule, not great. Like, you look at the teams they played, there really weren't many games where you're like, oh, that's a really good team that they faced. So I think a lot of people felt like they were maybe a little bit fraudulent going into the second half of the season. They were averaging nearly 41 points per game through those first 7 games. Then they finished 1-5 after that, averaging only 24.8 points per game. Jackson Dart didn't play as well in the second half of the year. They weren't able to just run the football at will like they did at the beginning of the season, and really took a toll on them. And when you don't have an elite defense and you're kind of just scoring, 24 points per game, can make things a little bit tough, as it did for Ole Miss. Kind of similar situation to what happened to Oklahoma State. Great start, rough finish. But I found some interesting other stats. So Jackson Dart, kind of surprisingly, ran the ball 10-plus times on 9 different occasions this year. That's a lot of rushing for your quarterback. And I think when you look at Spencer Sanders, you're looking at a guy that, I know he got hurt this year, but for the most part, he's been very durable. And a guy that's taken a lot of hits, but also been able to get up from those hits. He's a guy who can move the chains. He's physical. He's strong. And he's good in the red zone. I think all of those things are really big reasons why I do believe he will be the starter for Ole Miss next season. That physicality, that drive to get first downs, the experience to go along with Quinshon Judkins and this offensive line. I think they need someone like Spencer Sanders to help elevate this offense. And yes, you're going to take the turnovers. Those are going to happen. But I do think he can help elevate them to a whole nother level this next season. I also think, as far as Lane Kiffin goes, you don't bring in Spencer Sanders unless you're expecting him to be the starting quarterback. I view it that way. I also view it as Will Howard, the LSU transfer. I view him as the future. He's got 4 years of eligibility. I think he's going to be the guy they turn to next. And that leaves you going, okay, so where's Jackson Dart fit in? And personally, at this moment, I think that Dart's probably going to end up being a transfer. I think that after spring, once you figure out where you are, and if Lane Kiffin makes a decision on the quarterback battle, I think you'll probably see Jackson Dart go ahead and enter the portal. If a decision's not made and it lasts through the fall, then maybe you won't. Maybe you have all 3 on the roster. I just find that to be highly unlikely in today's age of college football. So at this point, I'm expecting Spencer Sanders, Will Howard to be the 1-2 on the depth chart for Ole Miss going into next season. Great pickup for Ole Miss in my eyes. I don't think this means they're going 11-1 or anything like that, but I do think that you can have more sustained success. And that's something that maybe they could have had this past year. I mean, they went 8-5, but when you start off the way that they did, 7-0, kind of anticipating a little bit more. So I think next year Ole Miss could be a team that goes 9-3 with Spencer Sanders at the helm. I really do. I think he can help elevate them a little bit, go to a bowl game with a chance to win 10 games, let the chips fall as they may. But I do think this is a very nice pickup for Lane Kiffin and his staff. So that's it for today. I'll have a couple more videos this week talking about a few more transfer additions and just some other topics that I found really interesting over the week of college football. But thanks for listening to Crystal Ball College Football.